Hello everyone, welcome to WIH's weekly interview sessions. Today's inspiring and wonderful interview is with our member, Hala Matar Choufany. She is the president for HBS, Middle East, Africa and South Asia. She has had a rich educational and career path, and today she's going to share some insights from that with us. Let's welcome Hala. Hello, Hala. Welcome to WIH's weekly interviews. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Wonderful. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you for having me.
I have already started and briefly introduced you, but would you like to say a couple of sentences more about yourself?
I mean, absolutely happy to. It gets a bit confusing when I'm introducing myself to talk to the professional word or to the personal word, but I'll keep it very brief. I'm originally from Lebanon. I'm a mom for 3 kids. I struggle now to call them kids because they're grown-ups already. And I have been in my role for the last 17 years, growing the HVS business in the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia.
Wonderful. Thank you. And to start off with the first question, you have studied in different universities, including Cornell, Harvard, ESSEC, and Notre Dame University. How did you decide to start studying hospitality at the University of Notre Dame?
You're going to find my response quite shocking, actually, because I never decided to study hospitality. Back in the days, as I said, I was born in Beirut, raised in Beirut, and at that time, all I wanted to become was a lawyer. And then at that point in time, it became clear that my Arabic skills are quite weak, and I had to look to do something else. And it was interesting because we were just about learning about tourism and opening up of the hospitality industry and global travel. And I thought that was exciting. And this is how I actually pursued the undergraduate degree in travel and tourism, carried out a couple of trainings, which if I go back in time, I'll probably do the same. I still would love to become a lawyer, but I very much also enjoyed the service industry at that point in time. And perhaps more importantly, having also worked in operations, I've come to realize that while I definitely enjoy operations as per se, there is so much more that I could do and that would keep me going in that sector. And this is where my further education have really helped me fine-tune my career aspirations. So it was a random walk into the sector. I still recommend it till date, but this is also an industry that requires a lot of passion. You just can't walk into it and excel if you don't have passion for it.
Indeed, it is true. And later on in your career, you've been going back to studying or taking different courses. Could you share with us what were some of the benefits of studying while building a career?
So that's something I've oftentimes reflected on, very frankly, and I get asked this question quite a bit as to why do I do further education? How is it going to help me in my career? And then again, the way I've always looked at education is very personal. It has never been that I'm pursuing further education because ultimately I have an end goal in mind. Earlier on, as I mentioned to you, Ralitza, once I've experienced travel and tourism, from an operational angle, it became very clear to me that this is something that I could certainly build on, but not necessarily the career I want to pursue. And this shifted my attention to pursuing my master's degree, specifically focusing on finance and strategy. And from that point onward, I would describe my journey as a consultant as being an ongoing learning. Frankly, because we're dealing with different projects. Perhaps I've also had the benefit of working in so many different continents, each allowing me really to grow a better understanding, be it of the culture, but also of investment dynamics. And there was a point in time, and this is why I said earlier on that education is very personal. There was a point in time when I felt I've been doing this long enough. I love my job. I want to stay with HVS, but I need something to further grow me as the person in me, not necessarily to do things in a better way, because my theory is every day I try to challenge myself So every day, once I feel I'm getting comfortable, I do something differently because there's so many ways to really excelling in that same space. So when I pursued, for instance, my education at Harvard, it wasn't necessarily to add to my academic background. Frankly, I wanted a sense check. I wanted to hear from the outside world. I wanted to actually pull myself out and to really validate or critique what I have been doing over the last 12 years. Now it's great because in many places I could tick the wins, but also it gave me a different perspective. I came back with a very different attitude, not necessarily professionally, but more personally as an individual looking at things from a different perspective. So, answering your question in terms of education, you can always educate yourself, whether it is through degrees, pursuing further education. Sometimes your biggest learning is just to surround yourself by people that can grow you, mentor you, and that we should never underestimate in terms of learning. And my advice has been for those pursuing higher education is to ask why and why now. Oftentimes we find students going straight from their undergrad into a master's, which is fine. But my experience tells me until you work and realize whether you're enjoying what you're doing or it's time to change gears, you want to allow yourself a little bit time because education should only support where you want to get to rather than just occupy yourself in the academic world. And looking back at the different degrees that I have done, each has fed and impacted my life professionally and personally in its own way, in a very nice way, actually.
It's wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing that. And you started your career with a position in Hard Rock Cafe. What were some of the challenges that you faced there and the skills that you needed to overcome those challenges?
Okay. So perhaps I should give you a little bit more background about Lebanon and where I was raised, because that really falls into the context of what does it mean to get out and work, A, as a female, and B, in a culture where typically you don't leave home early enough. So I didn't leave home, but it became very obvious as well to me that while I was studying, I'd like to put some of that into practice. And Hard Rock was about to open in Beirut, so I joined as a pre-opening team. And I must say, and it's a confession I'm making to the world now, I did recently confess to my dad, but I wasn't hired as a manager. I gave my dad the impression that his daughter is being hired as a manager when I actually joined as a hostess, made my way to becoming a server, and then a bartender, promoted to a supervisor, and then obviously proved myself, became an international trainer, and then a manager. But all along the way, I had to tell my parents that I'm a manager because back in the days, and this is back in 94, in Lebanon, in the Middle East society, we don't leave home to go work, especially as women. We definitely don't take on jobs or internships as a bartender or a server. I wouldn't want to use the word it's looked down on, but it's just not the norm, if you know what I mean. And it wasn't easy. But these were the best experiences of my life, actually. So many funny instances have happened. I mean, yes, they were challenging because you are thrown out of your comfort zone totally. And so you're breaking all the rules. I mean, now fast forward 20 years, this is common practice, right? So you go to Lebanon and, you've got all the younger population working in bars and restaurants. But back in the days, it was, I mean, I felt popular, I must say, but it was very, 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 very challenging. And that's probably the first opportunity in which, as a woman, I just didn't only have to prove myself in a career, but also to face the challenges of being a girl back in the days, working also in a society where it's not necessarily extremely tolerant. But then again, I had a very supportive family, so I was comfortable within my own infrastructure, if you know what I mean, or my own inner circle. And that was just the start, but it was challenging because it also meant that you had to deal with a lot of judgment, which is okay because that also helped me today not bother too much about how people judge, because things change, mentalities change, attitude change. It happened 20 years ago. It didn't make me any less. If anything, it made me more determined and stronger to make a point or to prove a point to myself. So it was very interesting, and that's probably the real experience I would describe as really stepping outside of my comfort zone amongst all the other experiences I've had. I was young, I was very determined. They said I was stubborn, I was rebellious. I mean, all this terminology. But the good thing is that oftentimes my dad these days would say things like, now I understand why she wanted to work. Because he'd say things like, but why do you need to work? I mean, are you short on money? And I'd say, you're missing the point. This is going to be so important for my career. This is going to be so important when I apply to universities. It had nothing to do with actually the earnings, although that's perfectly fine if that was the objective. But back in the days, I felt I really needed to support myself, not just with the academic degree, but with that operational experience. And thankfully, this is what got me out to EME and from there on, pursuing further experiences.
It sounds like a very inspiring story. And now you're working in various positions and you're taking part in different initiatives simultaneously. Could you tell us how do you combine all these different activities and their according responsibilities?
I'm going to start off by saying it's not easy. Because by the time I describe my life and how I've managed, it may sound like, the end result, it was easy. And I don't want to give the impression to anyone out there that I'm saying it is easy. It is not easy, but it's not impossible. So I think, if I reflect really on the part where, I joined HVS London, and I'm picking this as a starting point because it is that point in time when I had a full-time career with a career plan to grow, but I was also just about starting to build a family. So I wasn't the single girl that had plenty of time in the world. I was suddenly someone that had a key responsibility at HVS. That's the time when I set out to set up the Shanghai office, for example, arriving in an environment and a culture that I had a lot to learn about. And then I was expecting my second son. So I would describe the last 10 years as being quite intense, making sure that I have the right setup, the right team, and that they receive the right support, and making sure also that we're able to grow the HVS brand in the Middle East and there on Africa 5 years ago and recently South Asia. So that required quite a lot of discipline. And I use the word discipline because without the discipline, it could have been almost impossible. So when I was at work, I was 100% at work. And when I was home, I was 100% home. So that's the other discipline that you require, is making sure that when you're home, you're not necessarily feeling guilty about work. And it was very important to me. I mean, I always told myself, if ever I sense that my work is going to take away from my children, which are as important, if not more important, then I'm prepared to either change gears or reduce my working hours or drop out if that needs be. But I don't want to make an assumption that's not going to work. I'm going to go with the assumption that I'm just going to have to be a bit more disciplined, and I'm going to have to teach myself along the way priorities, and I'm going to have to feel less guilty at work, less guilty at home. And this is where I have spent most, I would say, of my own efforts, is actually leaving the office feeling that I have done 100% for what I could have done for the day, and equally at home. So it hasn't been easy, but with time, with discipline, with the support, and this is something I always highlight as well, both from a corporate standpoint as a culture at HVS, that is an extremely supportive culture, but more importantly, also the culture at home, whether be it my parents, whether be it my husband, whether be it the support system that I have in place. Had it not been the case on either end, perhaps success wouldn't have taken that form and shape. I mean, yes, I've done my bit as well, so I'm not discounting my bit, but I also have to give credit to making sure that we are also working for the right company that allow us a bit of room there, and that we have the right discipline or support at home. Because as it happens, I have a family and I have my other HVS family to look after. So there are certainly times along the way that it feels overwhelming, and you just want to run away, like run away from, from both. But by far, what I have learned is that sometimes it's the perception what worries us beyond the reality of things. Whether it's the perception that we could have done more at work, or the perception that our kids are upset. Well, neither our kids are upset, nor the expectation at work is what's in our mind. And that's one other thing that I would always recommend is let's make sure that our perception is not playing us up and making us feel stressed, because out there we're as human as anyone else. We're as a human as men, we're as a human as anyone in the workplace. There's no more of an expectation from us. So it wasn't easy, but it taught me a lot. And definitely where I am today is an accumulation of all the learnings I've done. And I feel much better and much more in balance, frankly, than 5 or 7 years ago. Could also be that the kids require less from me, and that I've also established established the HVS business in a way where I wouldn't necessarily want to use the word it's cruising. I mean, you don't cruise, you're always going to push forward, but that at least I have the right infrastructure or the right team in place that supports this growth.
And speaking of HVS, you've worked there for 15 years. Could you share what is the key to sustainability in a company, in your opinion?
Well, I think the key, I'd like to highlight two things which I think are extremely important. It's the attitude of the individual and it's the company. So let me start with the attitude of the individual. On a personal level, I'm a believer that you get out of any experience, be it work, be it university, being friendship, is what you put into it. And if you allow me just to explain my point, HVS could be and is by all means a great company to work for, but it also requires an individual to come forward and identify how they want to grow. And oftentimes this is where I feel individuals get stuck, that they either attend the best university or work for the best companies, but not necessarily pursue these opportunities. So my attitude has been is that I can get very comfortable, or I can push myself and ask for a bit more, whether it's the responsibilities, whether it's exploring. So looking back at when I started with the London office, after 18 months, the opportunity for my husband was to move to Shanghai. And I actually turned around and I said, HVS, do you want me to do anything in Shanghai? Can I do something in Shanghai? And they said, you know what, we've been wanting to open an office, but it's not going to be easy. And I said, let's give it a try. There's no harm. And that's exactly what happened. And thereon, moving to Dubai, it was similarly, where I actually said, Shanghai is a bit too far. I am now eyeing the Middle East. Is there something you want to do there? And they said, well, we definitely want to have an office in the Middle East. And we kind of worked on that one. So you need to drive it. I'm not saying 100% of the time you're going to get the response you're hoping for, but you need to drive the change if you want that change in your career within the same organization. Likewise, when I arrived in Dubai, as a company, we specifically focus on the hotel industry and hotel hospitality and other hybrids of hospitality. It became very clear to me as an individual, in order to compete in this part of the world, we need to develop expertise within the mixed use environment, which is not typical of HVS services. But I taught myself. I mean, today I haven't really changed the HVS hat. We're still hospitality consultants, but if it required a bit more understanding of what's happening with other asset classes, I've developed those expertise internally. And this is how I continue. And today I'm eyeing transaction and advisory, and that's going to be next in terms of an additional division or service line that we will offer at HVS. I couldn't settle for waking up to do the same thing every day of my life. So that is where, I think the personal drive is extremely important. You need to be ready. You need to say what you want, and then you need to find the middle grounds. And sometimes they don't give you exactly what you want. They give you something to start with, and then you take it on. And I think also not to underestimate the other important factor being the company. What is the culture that you work for? What is the company culture? Is that company culture going to allow you a growth plan? Is it visible? Is it clear? Do you trust the company? And oftentimes we take this lightly. And now I'm actually arguing that fast forward, employees are going to pick companies and not companies are going to choose employees. This relationship is changing because we want to work somewhere where we actually feel we're realizing our own. It's a two-way relationship, there's no doubt. But ultimately, that relationship has to be also a bit fairer in the sense of allowing both parties to achieve what they want. So again, it sounds easy, but it just happens to be great company with personally me. I don't settle for just doing the same thing every day. The attitude, if I can teach myself, I'll do it. If I can't, it's none of my business. Somebody else will do it, which keeps me, I would say, stimulated.
Could you also share with us a piece of advice on how we can remain in the same, but with various positions and build a long-term career?
Valitza, I'm so sorry, your line broke. I could hardly hear the question. If you could just repeat that.
Yeah, of course. Do you mind sharing with us a piece of advice on how we can remain in the same company, but try various positions and build a long-term career?
Well, I guess, what I said earlier on is about understanding what the company could offer, understanding what additional opportunities exist and how you could match your own skills to those opportunities. So in a situation where this company is pretty much not able to offer you any further opportunities, then probably it's time to move out. But oftentimes within the hospitality industry, especially for working within the large groups, there are so many different verticals. And today's workforce is also by far much more flexible, better rounded, I would say, better skilled. And therefore, my advice is, do not get too comfortable in anything you do. The minute you're comfortable, it's just about the right time that you start exploring outside of your comfort zone. It doesn't have to mean you're always racing and challenging yourself. This is tiring. That's not what I'm suggesting, that as soon as you're comfortable, you're finding the newer challenge. But what I'm saying, it's very important that you master what you know, but then that you take a shot at what more you are capable of doing. The truth is, you are capable of doing much more than you would have ever thought. This is what I hear consultants that I've hired tell me, that I saw in them what they didn't see in themselves, say, 5 years ago. Well, clearly, perhaps I have a bit more experience, but that's quite telling that oftentimes we underestimate as individuals what we can do, and therefore we should only try. So in these organizations, it's about identifying the opportunity and also putting yourself forward to try. Sometimes it may not necessarily come in the form of a direct employment or a direct opportunity. My advice is still support. Come in the role of a support. See what it means. Educate yourself, teach yourself, build those skills, and then move into that role. Where the challenge is, and what I have seen as well sometimes, is that individuals, just by eyeing an opportunity, feel that they're entitled to it. And it doesn't work also this way. It requires a bit of a homework and just walking slowly. As long as there is a clear end in mind, and you're building the right competencies along the way, it should be doable if you work for the right organization.
And looking back now, what have you accomplished in the past that you thought was impossible at that time?
Impossible is a big word. I'm going to struggle to answer that. I honestly don't believe there's anything impossible. So I'm not going to necessarily answer it from that point of view. But I think what I've come to learn along the way is the ability to actually pursue a career, a long-term career, grow across different continents in not necessarily the most straightforward, but rather very different cultures, and equally being able to raise a family without having to compromise on either. Now, naturally, I may have compromised on my own me time. I may have compromised on my own. And now when I look back, I say, yes, I have compromised on my own time, not necessarily that of the kids or that of the company, but that's okay. I've got still plenty of time to make up for that. So I wasn't necessarily sure. So I wouldn't be saying the truth if I said to you, I walked into it knowing exactly that's going to work out. I walked into it with the understanding that along the way, I'm just fine tuning. You know how you're kind of just making sure everything is in order, at least for the first 3-4 years, while we're setting up the office, which is 2008, probably into 2013, when I could tell myself that it's okay. And that's probably also identical with the age of my kids where they needed me the most. And now they're totally independent, or to some extent independent. So that's something that I needed to experience firsthand. And perhaps as well, because I didn't have a mentor, I didn't have somebody to talk to. Yes, I grew up in a family where my mom worked, but also during the war, she spent more time at home than actually in her office. So I didn't have in my mind a good reference as to how does it look like to be a mother, but also traveling and in the workplace. But eventually it worked out.
It sounds wonderful. And to finish off this inspiring interview, do you have an advice you wish to share with us?
I personally believe that a positive mindset specifically, is extremely important. Personal level, professional level. It's all about the way you choose to look at things. And a lot of it has to do with the power of your mind and the power of interpretation. And so definitely my advice is that you need to maintain a very positive attitude across every cycle and in any relationship. And that really is a game changer, if I could use the word. I mean, oftentimes you just feel so much difference between looking at things in a negative, pessimistic way versus looking at it in a positive and optimistic way. So that's one. The second extremely important advice I would give is that we need to be true to ourselves. We need to be satisfied with ourselves. And because this happens to be an interview with women in hotels, and oftentimes comes up as a discussion, women, men, workplace, it doesn't matter. Everyone else doesn't matter. The other woman doesn't matter, let alone that the male doesn't matter. What matters at the end of the day is that you are satisfied. So we don't all have to occupy positions. We don't all have to sit on boards. We don't all need to work. I mean, if somebody chooses not to work, that's perfectly fine too. It is all about being true to yourself and enjoying what your choice is, rather than feeling like we don't need to do anything as human beings. I mean, whether it's women, we don't need to do anything but to make sure we're being true to ourselves and enjoying what we do. So that goes to suggest that whatever you choose to do, make sure you do what you enjoy. Don't do anything because somebody has suggested this has to be done. Just do it, enjoy it, you will succeed. Definition of success is very personal as well, right? So excelling, exceeding, succeeding. I mean, you can use any terminology. Ultimately, what you want to do is you want to be happy with yourself. You want to be satisfied with your own accomplishments. So just stay true to yourself and have a positive mindset, and things most of the time work out in a positive way.
Thank you very much for this wonderful advice. And thank you very much on behalf of WiH for being here and for sharing your experience with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you once more, and wishing you a wonderful.
You too. Goodbye.
Bye.